Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia entered into a defense pact on Friday based on a NATO-style defense pact where an attack on one is an attack on another. So if someone attacks Saudi Arabia, that means Pakistan and Turkey will have to come in and defend Saudi Arabia and vice versa. Now, most people think this is based to target Iran, but that's not the reality. One thing we need to understand is that Pakistan and Iran are very, very close. Number one, 20% of Pakistan is Shia Muslims, which is the same Muslims as Iran. So they have a big population that is supportive of Iran being the dominant country that supports Shia all around the world. Number two, Pakistan's backer is China, and China is very supportive of Iran. One, because Iran provides the majority of China's oil imports, but two, geographically, China has built the One Belt Road Initiative, which takes kind of a rail corridor all the way from China to Iran, and that goes all the way to Eastern Europe and Western Russia, and bypasses the waterways where the US has a dominant power position, being one of the best navy armies in the world, and avoids the choke points like the Strait of Malacca, like the Strait of Hormuz. And so Iran is extremely important for China and Pakistan, because Pakistan is also part of that road initiative, and they're part of the BRICS nation that is going to be a challenger to the US as the world hegemon and the US dollar as the reserve currency. The relationship is so strong between those three, China, Pakistan, and Iran, that China is selling weapons to Iran through Pakistan. And Pakistan not only is transferring these weapons, it's training Iran on those defense weapons mostly, because Pakistan has a lot of the Chinese equipment, which was used in the China and the India-Pakistan war, and showed how effective those weapons are. While the Pakistan has the technical abilities and has to train Iran on those weapons. Now, China has never admitted publicly that they're selling weapons to Iran, because they don't do it directly. They sell it to other parties such as Pakistan. And what Pakistan does with those weapons is not going to be blamed on China, in the same way that Trump came out on Truth Social and said that, China, they promised me, Xi Jinping promised me that they're not selling weapons to Iran. And we don't sell weapons to to Ukraine. We sell weapons to our NATO allies. And what they do with those weapons, I have no idea. That's what he said on his Truth Social. Come on, we all know what happens to the weapons that America sells to NATO allies. They go to Ukraine to fight the Russians. And China has a similar arrangement with its allies. And so Pakistan is not going to go to war with Iran, one of its strongest allies, and has and shares a border with Iran. Between Iran and China, it's just one country, Pakistan. So there's a good connection there between those. And then you have Turkey, which also borders Iran and has a very, very good relationship with Iran. It would be suicidal for Turkey to wage a war against Iran. One of the reasons apparently why the Kurds didn't go, the US didn't really fully support the Kurds, is because Erdogan of Turkey said that we're not going to allow that. If the Kurds kind of take on the American weapons and start marching on into Iran to create their own country, Kurdistan, we're going to put a stop to that, because that's a threat to Turkey itself. There's a lot of Kurds in Turkey. There's a lot of Kurds in Iran. There's a lot of Kurds in Iraq. And so creating a country over there would take away from Turkey, parts of Iran, parts of Iraq. And Erdogan of Turkey is never going to allow that. And most people are misunderstanding this defense pact. It's a defense pact. It's not an offensive pact. So we saw when Ansarullah in Yemen was retaliating against what Saudi Arabia did to their airport, Sana'a, by bombing it, and then they started bombing Saudi Arabia. Pakistan, even though it had a defense pact before this new defense pact that was signed with Turkey and Saudi Arabia, Pakistan had a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, but it didn't do anything to Ansarullah in Yemen. In fact, they were pushing the Saudis to calm down and stop attacking Yemen. This defense pact doesn't mean that if Saudi Arabia goes on an offensive or starts attacking other countries, that Turkey and Pakistan are going to go and support Saudi Arabia, because that's an offensive action. This is a defensive pact. In the same way that when America started, bombing Iran, the NATO allies weren't 100% supportive. They didn't send their armies. Yeah, they may be helping in the background, giving some intelligence, but they're not sending their armies. And Trump was very pissed off about that. He said, why are we not, we're part of NATO. They're supposed to come and help us. Well, NATO is supposedly a defense alliance, not an offensive alliance. Now, there are some instances where they were used as an offensive alliance, such as in Libya to remove Gaddafi. But typically, it's a defensive alliance. And this will also be a defensive alliance between Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Pakistan. So if it's not targeting Iran and Iran's allies, then who is it targeting? There's two drivers I see to why right now Turkey, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia have entered into this defense pact. Number one, the US, which is the one that used to provide the security guarantees to Saudi Arabia, is massively diminished in its ability to do so because of what Iran has done to the US bases all across the Middle East, and to the fact that the US has used most of their defense missile capability. There's been many reports about how much interceptors and missiles, offensive missiles, America has used in their offensive against Iran. I mean, look at these numbers. This was released by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, April 2026. So this has been depleted further since April. But here is, each munition, the unit cost, the estimated pre-war inventory, the estimated use in the Iran war, and how long it will take to replenish what was used during this Iran war so far. So the Tomahawk and the JASSMs are the main weapons that the U.S. uses to attack Iran, because they can, they're not dummy bombs where you throw them from top, which is risky for the jets. They are shot off a distance, and so there's less risk of the airplane that's shooting them, or the Tomahawk actually comes from the aircraft carriers or Navy ships. They're shot at a distance. Well, they've used more than 1,000, so a third of the Tomahawks and a quarter of the JASSMs. And that's going to take about 4 years to produce 1,000 of those each 4 years. That's a lot. And they cost $2.6 million per Tomahawk missile, per JASSM missile. And then we go to the THAAD and Patriot. And those are the two over here at the end that are the main ways where the U.S. uses to defend against ballistic missiles shot by Iran. These are the interceptors missiles. Well, THAAD, which cost $15.5 million, they had 360 of those. And they've used 80% of that. And it's going to take them more than 4 years to produce that amount, 290 missiles. And then the Patriot, the same thing. They've used about 50%, more than 50% of the Patriots. They had 2,300. They've used about, 1,000, say 300. So that's going to take about, just under 4 years to produce that. And then you've got the SMs, which are also defense interceptors. They've used a big chunk of that. And the Prism this is a attack weapon that is land to land. So they're actually shot from land in the Gulf countries into Iran. Well, they had 90 of those. And they've used, up to 70. So they've pretty much used all of their land to land. So they were using Kuwait, for example, to shoot into Iran. This is how bad the situation is. So the U.S. doesn't have the missiles, doesn't have the capability to defend Saudi Arabia. This arrangement that they had for Saudi Arabia, in order for Saudi Arabia to sell its petrol in dollars, the petrodollar, the U.S. will provide security guarantees. That's gone. In fact, the U.S. has brought risk and instability to the region, not stability, by engaging in this Iran war, which was extremely unnecessary. And so there's a vacuum. There's a power vacuum. And that's where Pakistan and Turkey, which have the best military in the region, come in to provide that security, with Saudi Arabia providing funding. This is a much better arrangement for the region than the U.S. providing security, because the U.S. is thousands and thousands of miles away from that region. So it doesn't think about what happens to the region. It doesn't care. It's not going to impact the U.S. land, the homeland. Whereas Turkey and Pakistan are the neighbors of all those countries. And so it impacts what happens to them. And they want stability, especially China, who also wants stability, which is a backer of Pakistan. The other driver for this is the threats that Israel has made towards Turkey towards Pakistan. It said after Iran, Turkey is the next biggest threat. And it also sees Pakistan as a huge threat, especially because they have nuclear weapons. No other regional player has nuclear weapons. Israel has, and Pakistan has. And so if Israel now decides to attack Turkey, which they said that they would, if they attack Pakistan, if they attack Saudi Arabia, then this alliance comes into effect, and they start going after Israel. And really, the reality of things is this will act like a deterrence, and that no one's going to think of attacking Turkey. No one's going to think of attacking Pakistan because of this alliance. There's no expectation now that Israel is going to attack Turkey. That would be suicidal. Now, sometimes it seems like they don't think logically, Israel, especially with this Iran attack. It only made Iran stronger, opposite of what they intended to. But I don't think they'll go as far as attacking Turkey, even though previously they've said they would. So the real target, the real reason for all of this is there is a power vacuum right now. The U.S. is removing its influence, not by choice, not voluntarily. It's being forced to do so because of what Iran has done to the U.S. bases, to the U.S. radar installations and equipment in the region, and depleting the U.S. missiles and interceptors, where it's going to take 4 years plus to replenish those if they can get the rare earth minerals that are needed for those weapons from China, because 95% of the processing of those rare earth minerals come from China. And there are export controls and bans on what can go to the US because it knows that those rare earth minerals are going to be used to produce weapons that are going to fight China's allies right now, such as what it's doing with Iran, and in the future, possibly China itself. So why would China want to do that, help the Americans do that? So even if you give America 4 years to produce those, they don't actually have the rare earth minerals enough to replenish all of what they've used so far in attacking Iran and giving to Ukraine and giving to Israel to carry out their attacks and intercept missiles. This is what you're witnessing right now, is the fall of the U.S. empire. The fact that it cannot open a 21-mile distance, being the Strait of Hormuz, with its military power, which we're told is the best, indicates to many people that they can start challenging this empire. Iran has started a fuse that is going to blow up by more people now challenging the U.S. And at the same time, now countries don't need to sell their oil through dollar under threat from the U.S. because their military isn't as capable as we all thought it would be. This Iran war has proved it. They don't even have the missiles, which is insane to think that the U.S. doesn't have enough missiles to conduct a war. Now, Trump has said these are all lies, that we do actually have enough missiles to conduct a war with Iran, and technically that's true, because what they've used up so far is the missiles that are allocated to the Middle East, U.S. CENTCOM. But they have other missiles that are allocated to Europe, that are allocated to Pacific, that can take all of that away and allocate it to the Middle East to engage in further escalation. But that would deplete everything they've had. And so they cannot defend against what they say is their adversaries, being Russia or China in the future. They would just run out of missiles and be in a situation where they're just open to attack at any moment. The situation is so bad for the U.S. that now we're seeing what is coming out from the Oman-Iran Hormuz deal of the management of the Strait of Hormuz. And it is very, very bad for the U.S. The agreement says, and it is not finalized, we just have some draft wording, that Iran is going to control entry into the Strait of Hormuz. So any ship, any vessel that's going into the Strait of Hormuz, going to the UAE, going to Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, through the Strait of Hormuz, that has to be approved by the IRGC, by Iran itself. And then anything that comes out of the Strait of Hormuz, that will be managed by Oman, but Oman has to tell Iran everything that passes, and Iran can say no if it wants. So it has essentially, let's say, 51% control, where Oman has 49% control. So if Iran says no, Oman has to meet that condition. That is insane. For the U.S. to say that they've won the war, which is, can you believe they're actually saying that? And then at the same time, the reality is that they're actually going to accept, if they accept, Iran controlling all entry to the Strait of Hormuz. That means their Navy, the US Navy, cannot enter into the Strait of Hormuz anymore. They've lost that capability, those assets. Not only that, this is what the Iranian parliament is now proposing as part of the Strait of Hormuz. So this is the initial text of the plan, strategic action to ensure security and sustainable development of the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, which is under review by the National Security Commission. So this is not about the agreement between Oman and Iran. This is the Iranian local law that they're proposing to be implemented. According to this plan, vessels belonging to the United States, the Zionist regime, and other hostile countries are prohibited from passing through the Strait of Hormuz. They're not going to allow the US or Israel to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Shipments related to the Zionist regime, both military and civilian, will not have the right to travel through this area. So anything to do with Israel, not just Israel ships, but anything that may be passing to Israel will also be prohibited. Vessels or cargo that are involved in actions against the resistance front will also be banned. So this is to do with not just Iran, but Ansar Allah, the Iraqi groups that Iran supports, and the Hezbollah in Lebanon. So anything that attacks them will also be banned from passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Countries and individuals that have caused damage to Iran will not receive a permit to pass through the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf until the damage is compensated. So, I mean, which countries are we talking about here? It could be the Gulf countries, which, in Iran's view, help the U.S. attack and kill its people and kill their supreme leader and a lot of their leadership. So, they're basically maybe saying that they have to pay fees higher than normal until they compensate for all the damage that they have done. Don't forget, they attacked power plants. They attacked the energy infrastructure before, the U.S. and Israel. And so there's a lot of damage in Iran. For violators, heavy fines are predicted, including up to 20% of the value of the cargo. So basically saying that, hey, if you violate these rules, we're going to apply 20%. The government will be tasked with taking on responsibilities such as directing navigation, monitoring vessel traffic, and protecting the security and environment of the Persian Gulf in cooperation with the armed forces. And as part of the Iran-Oman agreement, Iran is going to be able to charge 5 to 7% of the value of the cargo as a transit fee, as an environmental fee, right? It's basically a toll, but you're not allowed to say a toll. Now, if the transit through Hormuz goes back to only 70% of what was before the war. So before the war, we had about 21 million barrels of oil. If we say 70%, so that's about 14.5 million barrels per day. And let's say the oil price is $75. That, 14.5 million barrels times $75 a barrel equals to $1 billion a day of value transiting. Right? And we're saying it's only 5% to 7% of that, then we're talking about, nearly 50 million to 75 million transit fee per day that Iran can get just on oil. Now, there's other stuff that's going through, like oil derivatives, LNG, other, chemicals, and Iran will be able to charge a fee on that. So we're talking about Iran being able to earn at least $25 billion a year, its share of transit fees. But in reality, it's not only about earning an income. Of course, Iran went through a lot of damages, and so it needs some kind of repatriation of that. And the U.S. is very unlikely to give Iran its unfrozen assets because Trump always makes fun of Obama for giving them $2 billion, when now Iran is talking about at least $24 billion that they want from the U.S. of their frozen assets that need to be unfrozen, even though Iran has about 100 billion of frozen assets. But this could be another way of doing that without Trump looking, being humiliated and kind of going through that process of giving Iran himself 24 billion. But for Iran, they also want this as a leverage that they control the Strait of Hormuz to ensure that if the U.S. doesn't meet the other conditions that Iran has, such as removing sanctions, such as unfreezing some assets in some way, or stopping the occupation of Israel, of the southern Lebanon by Israel, stopping the war with Iran. If any of these conditions that Trump has signed as part of the MOU, He has a signature on that MOU, which includes all of those things. If he doesn't mean any of that, then Iran can reduce the volume of transits through the Strait of Hormuz, reduce the oil that's coming out, increase oil prices, and wage economic warfare against the U.S. in the same way that the U.S. has waged economic warfare on Iran for 47 years with their sanctions and their other, freezing of assets and things like that. That is very important for Iran to control that, to act as leverage against or to force the U.S. to meet its conditions that it has signed, that has conceded as part of the MOU that Trump has signed. So this is where we are with everything. We were told that the Oman-Iran agreement, Hormuz agreement is going to come out, on Tuesday. Besson said that. Trump said that. Maximum Wednesday. Well, we're past Friday now, and we still haven't heard of the agreement. But the funny thing is, it's not going to be to the liking of the U.S. because now there's going to be fees. If the U.S. concedes that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz and they can apply fees, this is a huge humiliation to Trump and confirms the defeat of the U.S. because that wasn't the case before the war. There were no transit fees. Iran didn't control the Strait of Hormuz, even though it had the capability, as we're seeing right now, but never did. And then after the war, which was supposed to degrade Iran, is now giving more power to Iran. That is not a good look for the U.S. And so I don't see how Trump is going to accept this. But at the same time, what options does he have? They don't even have the ammunition to escalate the war. One could say that they do have some ammunition. They have a lot of dummy bombs that they can throw at Iran, but they have to throw that being above Iran, above Tehran. And throughout this war, they haven't really done much of that because there's a risk of the defense capability of Iran shooting down those airplanes. And we've seen them shoot down some airplanes in Iran. Of course, the famous one where the pilot, two pilots that were rescued apparently in Iran, which we don't know yet their names. But since then, China has provided more weapons to Iran, more defense weapons. And we don't know what Russia is providing too. Remember, Russia and Iran also share a border. They can move through the sea. So it's going to be very interesting how Trump reacts to this, what the U.S. can do, if they can do anything. But we'll update you as soon as we know. Would love to know your thoughts about will Trump whether Trump will actually accept this Oman-Iran deal if it includes a 5 to 7% transit fee and conceding control to Iran, to the IRGC. If you did like this video, do hit the like and subscribe, and we'll see you very soon.